Welcome to Morning Coffee with Kyle, that show where I visit with a friend of mine, have my coffee. We just enjoy talking and catching up on our ministry. And today I am really excited about the guest that I have on. This is Kristie Miles, or Kristie Miles, as I would know her. Kristie and I go way back. To our days as students and religious studies students at UNCG. We were classmates, though Michelle gets angry at me when I try to claim her as my friend. Michelle always says, "That's my friend, Kristie. You're trying to steal her." In addition to being a classmate, Michelle and Kristie worked together at the law firm downtown, Smith, Helms, Mullis, and Moore. And Kristie was a bridesmaid in my wedding. So that's how far back we go.
And Michelle was a bridesmaid in my wedding.
And Michelle was at Kristie. See, there we are, celebrating all that together. And if you're a part of Alamance, you may remember she was here for my installation service here. But we haven't really caught up much since then. So this is a great opportunity to do so. But Kristie, that's my introduction. Why don't you tell everybody a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Well, like you said, Kyle, I went to UNCG and got a religious studies major. And Kyle, one thing that you didn't mention is that you and I did a seminary tour together. Yeah. And we checked out several seminaries. And you ended up down at Columbia, and I ended up at Louisville in Kentucky.
But you know I have a Louisville degree now.
Oh, that's right. Yes. Mm-hmm. So, and I'm about to go start my DMin, hopefully at Pittsburgh. So we'll see.
Very good. Very good. Yeah. So now we're fellow alums. How about that?
Yay. And so I ended up in New Bern, North Carolina for about 6 years. And then my mother-in-law called me one day and she said, "There's a job here in Lynchburg, Virginia. You got to come. You got to apply." And so I did everything that a good daughter-in-law does and applied for a job that ended up being just the most wonderful fit for my ministry. It was at Westminster-Canterbury Retirement Community here in Lynchburg. And it was a good fit for me because I came from a small church background and a hospice background, which the two of those pieces melded really, really well in a retirement community. Because all of my teaching and preaching happened within a small group or small congregation type of feel. And then, of course, working with folks at the end of life, which is just incredibly rewarding. So that call to Westminster-Canterbury was phenomenal. I started in March of 2014 and have been working there ever since, until April of this year, when I transitioned from Westminster-Canterbury to Westminster Presbyterian Church.
Right?
Yeah. I have to stop myself when I answer the phone, Westminster Presbyterian Church. So it's been an interesting transition. I miss my folks at Westminster-Canterbury terribly, although 10 of my parishioners here at the church live over there. So, I've got the best of both worlds.
Yeah, wow.
When I was in seminary, I met my husband on the first day that I moved there. And at the time, he was finishing his seminary career and I was just starting. And he was specializing in chaplaincy, and he ended up being the pediatric oncology chaplain at Cosair Children's Hospital in Louisville. And I was watching everything that he was doing and experiencing. And as I'm studying for preparation for ministry, and I'm going, I never want to do what he's doing. That looks awful. And he was looking at what I was doing. I was focusing on small church ministry, and he goes, I never want to do that. Well, for the past 6 years, guess what we've been doing? He's been doing small church ministry, and I've been doing chaplaincy. And so I guess one of the lessons that we can learn from that is never tell God what you're not willing to do. Mm-hmm. Chaplaincy was just a dream. it was so incredibly fulfilling, because you meet people at the really critical junctures of life, and you get to walk with people as they are trying to answer the big questions of what's the meaning of life and why am I still here? I've lived much longer than I ever anticipated. Right now they've got a resident who's 107. They just recently lost a resident who was 106 or 7, I can't remember. And he was an honest to goodness rocket scientist. He worked for NASA. And so just walking with people and hearing their stories and seeing life from their perspective over the long term, the forest and not just the trees, was incredibly rewarding. So you asked me, tell me about yourself, and so I jumped in.
You've covered some good territory, and I love what I love the description. One of the reasons I wanted us to talk was really to think about the work of chaplaincy, and specifically the work with an older population, a crowd of people who are wrestling with that. That's something that I think all of us in church ministry are attentive to, at least in our mainline churches, our Presbyterian churches. So there's a disproportionately large number of folks who are over retirement age. And of course, that means very different things. And it's not just tied to age, but it's something that a lot of people think about, and something that a lot of people get a lot out of. So a question might be, a question I will ask is what do you think that people who make assumptions about living in retirement communities or living in that space where they're not at home anymore, what are some assumptions that people make that aren't really true, or what are some things that they would be surprised by?
That's an excellent question, and I thank you for asking it, because I think that has been one of my soapboxes over the past 6 years, is to demystify the experience of living in a retirement community, or even just living as a retired or older adult, because I think I honestly can think of only maybe 2 people who got there and didn't discover, wow, this is awesome. Why didn't I come sooner? And I've teased at Westminster-Canterbury, ever since I got there, saying I want to be here for the rest of my career, and then I just want to move in. And that part has never changed. I have picked out the apartment that I want. I want to live there. Oh my gosh, it's like, Kyle, it's like being in college except no exams. It's the most awesome thing ever. So let me give you a little background on Westminster-Canterbury and retirement communities like it. So it's a CCRC, a continuing care retirement community, which means that you come in at whatever level of care that you may or may not need, and it is able to provide for nearly any level of care that you may eventually need. So they have what they call independent living, and that's mainly apartments, all in several big buildings, and all the buildings are connected. So it's lovely when it's nasty out, or when it's like 100 degrees like today. You don't have to go outside. So lots of apartments. They also have some cottages, I think 24 cottages. So if you really want to have that single family home feeling, there are 2 and 3 bedroom cottages, and you've got a yard but you don't have to mow the grass, and either garages or carports, and you can watch the one resident bear come and eat your bird food out of the bird feeder. So those are the independent living residents. They also have assisted living. So for someone who needs at least assistance with one ADL, or activity of daily living. So for instance, if you really can't cook for yourself, or get to the cafe and the restaurants that are on campus by yourself, then you would perhaps qualify for living in assisted living, or if you need help with bathing or dressing or, medication management, some of those things. And then the next level on the continuum is skilled nursing care. And in the middle there, they also have a dementia care unit, which is my absolute favorite place on the whole campus. And people think I'm bananas when I say that, but I love, love, love working with people who have of many of the various kinds of dementia. Alzheimer's would be the predominant one. And the reason is because people with dementia live in this moment right now. They're not thinking about what's going to happen in an hour. They're not thinking about what happened yesterday. They might be thinking about what happened when they were 5. But generally speaking, the memories are happy and they're living right now in the moment. And that moment is a joyful one when the environment is done properly. And they're a joyful group of people. So I love that, that little neighborhood there at Westminster-Canterbury. And then finally, I started to say there's skilled nursing care. So anyone who needs a lot of assistance in their ADLs. So that's the background for it. And I had the privilege of getting to know everybody on every level of care. And there was a little bit of deer in the headlights when they first come in. I mean, there's a lot to get acclimated to. I imagine it's hard to release a lot of the stuff that you accumulate over the years. Now, Kyle, I know that you and Michelle have moved a couple, 1, 2, 3 times in your marriage, at least.
Right.
Brian and I have been married 18 years and we've moved 9 times. So we have found that that's really helpful in divesting yourself of a lot of stuff.
Right.
Although my books don't count, don't touch them. But, if you live in one house for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, you accumulate a lot of stuff, and that comes with memories and nostalgia. And so probably the biggest struggle with people moving into a retirement community is getting rid of and allowing some of it to pass on to the younger generations, and some of it is charitable giving, and some of it is the trash can. Yeah. And then accommodating to a smaller space, because almost always you're going to be, downsizing. And that's another hard piece when you move through the continuum. The rooms get a little bit smaller. Although Westminster-Canterbury just last year built a new health center, which made it so that everyone has their own room. No one has to share a room, which is especially helpful. If you are 90 and you've been living on your own or with your own family or spouse for all those years, and now you have to live with a stranger.
That's not part of the college experience, right?
Yeah, don't want to go back there. So they've done a really good job of creating a beautiful situation there. And it's funny, when people first move into the independent living, there's that big hurdle of getting rid of your stuff and moving into a smaller space and acclimating to communal life, because it is. You can shut the door and be in your own apartment and not talk to anybody if you want to. But if you want to talk to someone, if you want to find somebody to get to know or build friendships or whatever your interest is, it's there to discover. And even though there is a little bit of trepidation, I think almost always people find this is amazing. And I don't miss cutting the grass anymore. Or cleaning out the gutters. Then the next big hurdle comes when they need to move to assisted living or skilled nursing care. And there are lots of fears about what that's going to be like. What are my next door neighbors going to be like? Are they going to be able to have a conversation? Or are they going to be demented? Or are they going to have some behaviors that are embarrassing or uncomfortable for me? And certainly that is a part of it, but on the whole, I think that people find that it's much less scary than they thought it was going to be. And nursing homes, I think that this is important to say, nursing facilities are not what they used to be. So what perhaps my grandmother and maybe your grandparents, I don't know what their aging process is or was like. Nursing homes were hospital-like, and they were a little antiseptic. They didn't feel like your space, and you had to fit into what the nursing home said was time to eat, time to bathe, time to go to bed. There's this big push in nursing facilities, in retirement communities, called person-directed living. And Westminster-Canterbury is one that has been moving in this direction and has done a wonderful job. And, it occurs to me that I sound a little bit like an advertisement. Neither of us are being paid for this, but I really do have a lot of respect. And
I think it's really helpful, just your statement that they're not what they used to be. We all form our impressions of things, and in the course of my ministry, I have seen that change and have not really articulated it in my own mind, much less said it in the way that you just beautifully put it. Maybe I thought it was just about the kinds of facilities that I was visiting, but that's not it at all. It's about a wholesale culture change, and it's about a very different kind of care. And it even to be really crass, like in my own mind, early in my ministry, I associated those places with particularly the nursing facilities,
with a certain smell.
Right? And never go into a facility like that anymore. And maybe I'm thinking it's because, the ones in Greensboro are better than the ones in other places. That's not true.
Not necessarily.
A complete change of culture and engagement and philosophy. And
absolutely.
And I think that's really important, particularly for people who formulated an impression and a memory about one of those places and are now thinking about ending up in one themselves.
Right.
And so maybe part of what would be helpful, and this is of course after pandemic, but maybe it would be good to visit places like this with folks who are not to sell them on it, but to really change some impressions and perceptions. And we have some great places in Greensboro that some of our folks are at now or have been, just the same as Westminster-Canterbury, that when I go in and visit, or some of our lay visitors go in, they're nicer than our places, right? I mean, it's beautiful, and in the community you can just see, you can see people sitting and talking, and not in the I was parked somewhere in a wheelchair sense, but in the I look forward to being out here and visiting with you, and I might stay 2 hours, and I'm talking to people who have fascinating backgrounds. I won't name names, but I have ended up with some really important people they had important positions in our town and in the community. And I find myself sitting and hearing their stories alongside of other people with, who just come from everywhere. And all because I've gone to visit one of my members in a facility like that. So I guess we are in the midst of a commercial, but on the other hand, I think whether it's for you or not, forming a different impression is worthwhile if you're thinking about being in that sort of space.
Absolutely.
So
I grew up in Jamestown. I went to Jamestown Presbyterian Church. And I remember as a youth group member going to the Presbyterian home in High Point, which doesn't exist anymore. The building is still there, but I think it's empty. And to be honest, Greensboro, Jamestown, High Point has changed so much. I need GPS to get around my own hometown now. So thanks a lot, Piedmont. So we used to go there, and the impression that I had as a young person going in was, number one, smells, right? And I don't want to be critical, but I think that we now know that we can do a better job of orienting people who are unfamiliar with those settings, whether they're young people or adults, with what to expect and how to cope with perhaps some of the things that you see, smell, experience. We're not going to erase unusual behaviors that come from people with dementia, but you can teach folks how to cope with them as a visitor, and what's supposed to be I'm not saying this very well. What is really an indication that they're in crisis, or what's an indication that these are normal behaviors, right? So if a staff member isn't, running around like their hair is on fire when somebody's saying, help, help, it might be because this person says that all day long.
Right.
So I think that one of the things that I enjoyed doing at Westminster-Canterbury was helping people figure out how to be a visitor. Whether that's as a clergy person or a church member or even a family member. Some people have family members who come daily or weekly, or, maybe they live across the country and they come every 6 months. And some people have family close by, but they don't visit. And I think sometimes that's because they just don't know how to be in that space. And so if we can walk with one another, both literally and figuratively, in how to do that. And I think it's really super important to build that into our young people so that they feel like it's a familiar place and a homey place to them. And the value of the young people, oh gosh, I sound like I'm 48, don't I? I'm turning 49 next month. The young people, the value of having children come to that space, you cannot overestimate it. Overestimate, underestimate? You know what I mean. They bring so much joy just being, they don't have to do anything special. Or if they have a little show, they want to put on, they can do that too. But
one of the things I've said, taking groups into spaces like that, is that, for people who, one of the difficult parts of their life is that it feels often to them like there's some monotony, right? And that's changing in terms of, activities and that sort of thing, or depending on what level. But if you're a group of kids from a youth group or a children's group that come and sing, even folks who struggle with memory will be talking about that months later.
You better believe it.
And I'm thinking specifically about one family, and this isn't in a retirement community, it was in their home. But every time I visited them, it could be July, we were talking about Christmas caroling every single time, right? And it's because the impression, an indelible impression, and these are folks who, don't see children. And it's hard for me to imagine that, because I have a 6-year-old, like I see children, maybe not as much as anymore, but the reality is that that's a precious moment for people who just don't see kids in the same way, or don't get to interact, and to love, that the difference that makes. Just a small thing, 10 minutes out of your day might matter, in a way that just far transcends it.
Yeah. And on the flip side of that, because we are such a boxed society, children do this, young adults do this, family adults do this, older adults do this, and we all have our own spheres. Whereas, multi-generational families used to live together and do more things together. I think that not only our older folks are missing the interactions with the young people, I really think that the young people are missing the interactions with the older folks, and they don't know what they're missing.
Right.
They haven't experienced it, so they don't miss it. So let me give you a little vignette. So I've been here at my church, Westminster Presbyterian, for 3 months. Yeah, 3 months. And we have 5 children under the age of 6 here in our congregation. And it's two families and they're cousins. So a brother and sister and a brother, sister, brother, and their dad is, and their mom were brother and sister. Okay, family tree done. So I had the kids come here to the church one day, and I asked them to show me around the church so I could see it from their perspective. And so we started, well, the first place they wanted to take me was the Sunday school room, their Sunday school room. And they showed me everywhere. And I said, what do we do here? And they told me everything that they do in there. They learn about Jesus. And then we went upstairs and we went in the fellowship hall, which they called the living room, because what do you do in a fellowship hall? You live, right? So they showed me everything you do and what you're not allowed to do in the living room. And then we went in the adult Sunday school room and they showed me what you can do in there. And I said, what can you do in here? And they said, sit right here and be quiet, which was funny. So then we left that and we went to the kitchen and we stood in the doorway and I said, what do you do in the kitchen? And they said, the only thing we're allowed to do in here is hug Nanny Pix. So Nanny Pix is a senior adult here who does not have any biological grandchildren of her own, but she is the adopted grandmother for all 5 of these kids and pretty much every other kid that she comes across. And the relationship that they have been able to build together is one of mutual love and respect. And they go to her for stories and comfort and wisdom, and guidance, and popsicles, and she gets from them their joy of living and their energy. But it was just so interesting doing the kitchen. It wasn't, we get a snack or we cook food. It was, we get to hug Nanny Pix. And I think that's one of the things that older adults have in abundance is willingness and time and all those stories. And even if they're talking about stories from 70 years ago, and they don't remember the past 60 years, but they do remember 10 years or the first 10 years of their life, even those stories are so abundantly valuable for both sides of that generational coin.
Yeah. I think about my own little girl and the 2 church communities that she has lived in. Well, one of the great joys of my life will be having so many people love her. And of course, because of who she is, the wonderful, precocious little girl that she always will be, I guess, in my head. But also just because that's what we do, right? I've watched 2 whole congregations love my kid into being who she is, right? And you never know how your kids are going to turn out. I have some high hopes for her, and I will credit on that day the incredible amount of love that she was shown through our whole time from the congregation as much as anything else shaping who she is. And that is certainly something that she is privileged to have that a lot of kids her age don't see at all.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. I think it's important for us as church folks to not forget that, it's not only the big events of our lives. It's not only the programs that we put on. It's the ethos and the relationships that we establish and perpetuate that we tend to forget. If we've been raised in the church like you and I were and committed from early age to our careers in the church, it's easy to forget that that's not a common experience anymore. And it's something that we have to offer.
Yeah, I love that so much. And I've been sitting on a question for a while, and what we've just said has kind of reshaped it some. So the question I have then is, how do we help those children? What are some things we can do other than just showing up there? I mean, that's certainly something, but how do we help our children and maybe even our young adults and maybe even our middle-aged adults? That was initially where this was going. But how do we help help them to have the kinds of conversations that are difficult to have with our older folks, or how do we help them wrestle with, you
Mhm.
know, the reality of aging? You know, I have sort of had the impression that one of the things that we do in our culture is we hide our older folks with
Yes.
some amount of intention.
Yes.
And if we have been guilty of anything with communities like the ones that we've been talking about, blessings that they are, it's
Mhm.
it's putting people in a box so we don't have to focus on that reality. The largest growing population in our society, right? And yet we don't want to look at them. We don't want to consider this. And part of it, I know, is because we struggle with our own idea of mortality, you know, what it is
Yeah.
to be mortal, and we don't want those examples in front of us. We want to be invincible and think we're going to live forever. But how do we help people, you know, in those younger years, or maybe even middle years, you know, interact with folks who are dealing with that, and give them a vocabulary and an understanding and a skill to
Hmm.
live into that in a richer way? That's probably 6 questions, but I'll let you say whatever you want to that.
Yeah. Well, you just pulled out my soapbox, so thank you.
You're all
um, you know, during my time as the chaplain at Westminster-Canterbury, one of my job responsibilities was to talk to people and help people work through their advanced directives. In many hospital systems, before you undergo a major procedure or surgery, or you know, if you're very ill, they will ask you, do you have advanced directives? And if so, or if not, can the chaplain come and help work through that with you? Um, and I was always dismayed by how many people were of a certain age and hadn't done any of that existential or little work. They've taken care of their financial wills, you know,
Mhm.
but haven't had that real honest conversation, not only with themselves and with God, but with their spouse or with their children. And let me tell you, it is the greatest gift you can give your family members, to have those honest, sometimes heart-wrenching conversations about medical care and life expectancy, and what you want um, out of the breath that we have. So of course, it most people think, yeah, you know, when you get to a certain age, whatever that age is for you, you think I should probably come up with funeral plans, and what do I want for medical care at the end of my life, and so forth. But I had to learn the hard way 14 years ago, that it really is not something that is only for the older generation. It's really something for everybody. And I don't know if you know what I'm going to say next, but so actually today is mine and Brian, my husband, our kidney anniversary. So 12 years ago today, we split a pair of kidneys, and I have one and he has one. And before we went into surgery, you know, normally the person that the doctor's going to go to, like if you're having surgery, Kyle, they're going to go to Michelle and
Mhm.
say, you know, we came across this problem and you tell us what you want us to do. Well, what if Michelle's, you know, in the other operating room? So that was our situation. You know, Brian, my husband, was in one operating room, and I was in the adjacent one. And so if something happened to one of us, um, we had to tell the doctors who to talk to. Both of my parents were and still are living, and so they probably would have been the go-to people. My mother-in-law and her sister were there for my husband. So we had to make some tough decisions about who would make those decisions for us. And the process of going through those advanced directives, it forces you to think about your own mortality and to realize, you know, this form that I'm in now is not going to continue forever. um, and it's not if something will happen, it's when. um, and it's better to think through some of those things. Now, you can't come up with every possible scenario out there, but you could think about the big questions, you know. So Brad and I did have those deep and tough conversations. He did die on the operating table. When I was finally able to see him, he looked like a Michelin man because they had pumped him full of gallons full of saline solution to keep his blood pressure up. And he had 43 surgeries in 2.5 years. So we were constantly faced in our 30s with not only his mortality, but mine. And we had a 1.5-year-old. Well, Joseph was 3.5 when we finally had the surgery. Joseph is our son. So really, discussions of one's own mortality and what you hope for your life, and what is worth living for you. So for instance, if I cannot eat chocolate cake, pull the plug. If I cannot eat chocolate cake with chocolate sauce on it and maybe a little chocolate ice cream next to it, now, if I ever get to that point, I might reevaluate then and go, well, you know, and that's okay. But to think about that ahead of time, and then the critical piece is to have that conversation with your loved ones, to have that conversation with anyone who would have a stake in the game, right? So that's parents, children, grandchildren, spouses, anyone else who the doctors might say, what do you think that this person would want? And so to hopefully bring your question around, and how do we cope with this as a society as well as a church, is I firmly believe that we have to build into all of our conversations, our preaching, our teaching, our pastoral care calls, with those questions. And usually I start out by saying, can I ask you a really hard question? And they'll usually take a deep breath and go, okay. But in doing that, it acknowledges that not only that this is a difficult question to answer, but it's also a difficult question for me to ask you, you know, and to build into that willingness to have those intergenerational conversations. If a person gets to the end of their life and their children really have no idea what their parent would want for themselves, there's been some communication breakdown.
I think that probably happens about more often than not.
Oh, it does. Absolutely. And it's really interesting because sometimes if there's more than one child, like in my family, I'm the eldest of 4, which means that I'm bossy and I'm loud. Are you the oldest?
Sort of.
Your family?
You're
the first of the second. Okay. So, you know, it's funny. One kid will go, well, you know, mom and I had this conversation 10 years ago, and she told me exactly what she wanted. And the other person's going, well, she's never said that to me. And then there's some hurt feelings because this one didn't get talked to, right? They got left out. And then there's a third one over here going, yeah, but last week she told me that she wanted chocolate cake, right? So, you know, not only having those conversations, but having the same conversation with all of them, maybe at the same time, you know.
Well, I think that's really, really smart. And it's something that I run into all the time as a pastor, and even for people who I know and love and care for. But I mean, it's almost the rule rather than the exception.
Yeah.
That when a parent dies, or if they're at the end of life, this friction. And you know, I have given the advice more times than I can count. You know, you need to have these conversations now. And I'm saying this to the, you know, as much to the parent as anyone. You need to have these conversations now, because if you're not having them with their family, they're going to have them in a way that is not healing and is not unifying, and is going to be a lot more painful than this really hard thing you have to talk about.
Absolutely. You know, we put so much thought and effort and time into creating our financial wills. You know, who's going to get what? Who's going to get the beach house and who's going to get the mountain house? I know a family who has one of each, and one kid gets this one and one gets this one. You know, if you put more time and attention into that than your life and your emotional investments, you're lopsided. And the other piece of that is that you have to continue to review them, because my life is different now than it was 12 years ago. And the choices that I made 12 years ago might not be the same that they are now. For instance, I alluded to this a moment ago. I knew I couldn't ask Brian to be my power of attorney, healthcare power of attorney, when we were in surgery. And so I had to think about who I wanted. Can you guess who I chose? So my sister was taking care of our son. So she was going to be his guardian if we died. My parents were there and are wonderful and supportive and lovely, but I didn't choose them. I chose my mother-in-law. And so I chose my mother-in-law 12 years ago because I knew that she would do exactly what I told her to, even if she didn't agree. Right. And I knew she'd be there. And I know she knows how to fight with doctors. So I chose her for those reasons. But she died 5 years ago. Mm. And right now, Brian is my de facto power of attorney. But I'm realizing I need to put it in writing.
Right.
Who needs to do that?
We're dealing with too. I mean, we were planning to go to Puerto Rico before the pandemic hit. We were going on a mission trip, both of us, and Malin wasn't going, of course. And for the first time, you know, since we've been a family of three, this is an issue that was before us. We're going, you know, it's not fair to say out of the country, but we are going over the sea, right? We're going to a place that you can drive to, and you know. What does it mean to talk about her care if the plane went down or something, you know, awful happened to us when we got into that place where, unfortunately, so many awful things have been happening in the last few years, right?
Yeah.
Beautiful place that have just been fraught with problems, from earthquakes to hurricanes to what have you. And, you know, what is it, you know, what does it look like? And that's not an easy choice for all the reasons that you're talking about, right?
No.
It's just not easy, and it's something that we didn't have settled before our trip was canceled, but we would have had settled. So.
Yeah. Right. Oh my gosh. There is a wonderful book called Death Over Dinner. And so the idea is that you invite, say, 8 people, probably no more than 10. And, you know, for instance, you could facilitate this and facilitate a discussion over dinner, which, you know, you do the dinner setting and everybody's able to look at their plates if they can't look at each other in the eye. But also the boundaries, especially if you have a little glass of wine, the boundaries sort of soften a little, and you invite people of different generations to have this conversation. So if you know that Mr. and Mrs. Smith are having a hard time talking about this with their kids, invite the kids. Mm-hmm. Or invite people who are their kids' ages. So that those people can, you know, like let's say the 30-year-olds can reflect back what their thoughts and experiences and generational perspective is with the next generation. And that helps both sets then go have the conversation with the people that they need to have the conversation with. So Death Over Dinner, fantastic book, fantastic outline for how to do this well.
Kristie, you and I are going to keep talking because we're just not done. But people will stop watching if we don't call it. So I'm going to call it, because that's a good place to end with a good recommendation. So thank you so much for.
You're very welcome.
This has been absolutely fantastic. I look forward to sharing it with the church and sharing it as widely as I can. There's some really important stuff I think that we have talked about today that so many people I know and love need to be attentive to. So thank you for coming on.
Yeah,
Do you have a
thank you.
final word?
Send me the link of the recording, and maybe next time we can switch roles and I can interview you.
See, this is another great idea. Look forward for us to have Kristie, me and Miles on Morning Coffee with Kristie, and I'll be the guest, and we'll see how it goes. In the meantime, this has been Morning Coffee with Kyle and Kristie. We'll see you next time. Thanks so much. Bye, Kristie.
Bye.